The crystal spires of Colony Prime reach toward the purple sky Kepler 442b, their surfaces reflecting the light of twin suns that had warmed this world for 300 years. Commander Veltar stood on the observation deck of the orbital defense station, his translucent skin shimmering with the nervous patterns that marked deep worry among his people. The Zephyrians had built their most important research colony here because the system was far from the chaos of galactic politics, tucked away in a quiet corner where they could pursue their studies of ancient civilizations in peace. That peace was about to end. The communication array crackled to life with an urgent transmission from the outer sensor grid. Lieutenant Keshra, her voice tight with fear, delivered the news that Veltar had been dreading for weeks. Commander, long-range sensors detect a massive fleet approaching from the Vorthan Empire. Initial count shows at least 200 vessels, including multiple dreadnought-class warships. Veltar closed his 4 eyes and felt his crystalline bones resonate with dread. The Vorthans were the nightmare that haunted every peaceful species in this sector of the galaxy. They were 9 foot tall, reptilian warriors whose entire culture revolved around conquest and domination. Their empire had consumed dozens of worlds over the past century, leaving nothing but stripped planets and enslaved populations in their wake. The Zephyrian defense fleet consisted of 12 elegant vessels designed for exploration and light peacekeeping duties. Their energy weapons could disable pirates or defend against wild animals, but they had never been intended to face a full military invasion. Veltar knew that his ships were beautiful examples of Zephyrian engineering, with their flowing lines and crystal matrix hulls, but they would be like glass sculptures thrown against hammers when the Vorthans arrived. He activated the colony-wide communication system and spoke to the 3 million Zephyrians living on the planet below. Citizens of Colony Prime, this is Commander Veltar. We have detected an approaching Vorthan fleet. All non-essential personnel should report to the underground shelters immediately. This is not a drill. The response was swift but calm, as it always was with his people. Zephyrians did not panic easily, having evolved from creatures that lived in harmony with their environment rather than in constant struggle against it. They filed into the protective bunkers that had been built deep beneath the planet's surface, carrying their most precious research data and cultural artifacts with them. Veltar then turned his attention to organizing what defense was possible. The 12 ships of his fleet were scattered across the system on various missions, but he managed to recall 8 of them to form a defensive formation near the planet. The remaining 4 were too far away to reach the battle in time. Captain Rindle commanded the flagship Harmony, a sleek vessel that served as the fleet's command ship. Her crew had trained for this moment, but hoped it would never come. "All ships report ready for combat, Commander," she transmitted. "Though I must note that our tactical computers estimate our chances of success at less than 2%. "I understand, Captain," Veltar replied. "But we must try to buy time for the civilian evacuation. Perhaps we can convince the Vorthans that the cost of taking this system is too high." It was a desperate hope, and they both knew it. The Vorthans had never been deterred by casualties before, and their ships vastly outnumbered and outgunned the Zephyrian defense force. But Veltar had sworn an oath to protect his people, and he would not abandon that duty, even in the face of certain death. The Vorthan fleet emerged from hyperspace, at the edge of the system like a swarm of metal predators. Their ships were dark and angular, bristling with weapon arrays and armored like the warriors who built them. The largest vessel was the flagship Bloodfang, commanded by War Chief Krex Volume, a veteran of 30 successful conquests. Krex Volume stood on his bridge, his scarred hide gleaming under the red lights that his species preferred. He had studied the intelligence reports on the Zephyrians and found them laughably weak. "These crystal-boned fools think their pretty toys can stand against the might of the Empire," he growled to his second-in-command. We will crush them like insects and take their research data for our own use. The first battle was brief and brutal. The Zephyrian ships moved with elegant grace, their energy beams creating beautiful patterns in space as they struck the Vorthan vessels. But their weapons, designed to disable rather than destroy, barely scratched the heavy armor of the invasion fleet. In return, the Vorthan plasma cannons unleashed torrents of destructive energy that carved through Zephyrian hulls like knives through silk. Within 20 minutes, 6 of the 8 defending ships had been destroyed or crippled. The Harmony and one escort managed to escape back toward the planet, their crystal hulls cracked and leaking atmosphere. Captain Rindle's voice was steady despite the desperation of their situation. "Commander, we cannot stop them. They are too strong and too many." Veltar watched the tactical display as the Vorthan fleet advanced toward his world. The underground shelters would protect his people from orbital bombardment, but they could not hide forever. Once the Vorthans established control of the system, they would begin the systematic process of stripping away everything the Zephyrians had built over 3 centuries. That was when he remembered the ancient protocols that had been established. When the Galactic Alliance was formed, back when dozens of species had sworn to help each other in times of crisis. The system had rarely been used, and many doubted whether anyone would respond to such a call in these modern times, when most civilizations looked after only their own interests. But Veltar had no other options left. He accessed the emergency communication array and began composing a message that would be broadcast across subspace to every member species of the Alliance. The words came slowly at first, then faster as desperation gave them urgency. "This is Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian Federation, Colony Prime, Kepler 442 system. We are under attack by a massive Vorthan invasion force. Our defenses have failed, and we face complete annihilation. Under Article 7 of the Galactic Alliance Charter, I hereby request immediate military assistance from any member species capable of providing aid. We have approximately 72 hours before our final defenses are breached. This is not just a request for help. It is a plea for survival." The message went out across the galaxy on priority channels, reaching hundreds of worlds within hours. But as the responses began to trickle back, Veltar's hope faded. Most species were too far away to help in time. Others were already engaged in their own conflicts. A few offered sympathy and promises to remember the Zephyrians fondly after. They were gone. The Vorthan fleet settled into orbit around Colony Prime and began the methodical process of breaking down the planetary defenses. Their bombardment was precise and clinical, designed to leave the infrastructure intact while eliminating any resistance. Krex Volume wanted the research facilities and manufacturing plants undamaged so they could be put to use serving the Empire. As the second day of the siege began, Veltar prepared for the final phase of the battle. The underground shelters could hold out for perhaps another day, but eventually the Vorthans would find ways to breach them. When that happened, his people would face a choice between slavery and death, and he knew which one they would choose. Was reviewing the evacuation reports when Lieutenant Keshra burst into the command center with excitement gleaming in her crystalline features. "Commander, we have received a response to our distress call. A species called humans from a planet named Earth has acknowledged our request and says they are sending reinforcements." Veltar accessed the database entry for Earth and felt his hope dim again. The world was classified as a death planet with crushing gravity, violent weather, and dangerous native life forms. The inhabitants had only achieved faster than light travel within the last 50 years and were listed as a primitive species with limited military capabilities. The transmission from Earth was brief and direct, delivered by someone identified as Admiral Jake Morrison of the United Earth Defense Force. His image showed a bipedal creature with soft-looking pink skin and small eyes, standing barely 6 feet tall. "Reinforcements en route," the creature said in a calm voice. "Hold your position." Veltar stared at the message for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or cry. These tiny aliens from their violent world thought they could face the Vorthan Empire with their primitive technology and soft bodies. It was either the bravest gesture he had ever witnessed or the most foolish. But as the Vorthan bombardment continued and his people huddled in their shelters, Veltar found himself hoping that the humans would arrive soon, even if their help proved to be as fragile as their appearance suggested. In the darkness of defeat, even the smallest light seemed worth grasping. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the command center of Earth's primary orbital defense station, watching the holographic display that showed the location of every human ship in known space. At 62 years old, he had spent most of his life preparing for humanity's first real test in the galaxy, though he had never expected it to come in the form of a desperate plea from aliens he had never met. The message from the Zephyrian colony had reached Earth's communication arrays 6 hours ago, and Morrison had spent that time assembling the most powerful fleet that humanity could muster on short notice. 3 ships hung in the darkness above Earth, their hulls gleaming with the strange metal alloys that human engineers had developed for deep space warfare. The largest vessel was the USS Defiance, a massive dreadnought that stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Its captain was Lisa Rodriguez, a former fighter pilot who had earned her command through 20 years of service in Earth's various conflicts. She stood on her bridge now, reviewing the tactical data about their enemy while her crew prepared the ship's weapons systems. Rodriguez had grown up in the ruins of old Mexico City, where her family had survived by being tougher and smarter than everyone around them. She had learned early that size and strength meant nothing if you could not use them effectively, and she had built her career on proving that lesson to anyone foolish enough to challenge her. The second ship was the USS Ranger, a heavy cruiser, commanded by Captain Tony Walsh. Walsh had been born in the asteroid mining colonies, where a single mistake could kill everyone on the station. His crew trusted him because he had never lost a ship or failed to complete a mission, no matter how dangerous the situation became. The smallest vessel was the USS Storm, a fast attack destroyer under the command of Amy Johnson. At 35, Johnson was the youngest captain in the fleet, but she had earned her position by being the best pilot humanity had ever produced. Her ship could move faster than anything else in space, and she intended to use that speed to devastating effect against the enemy. Morrison had chosen these 3 ships because they represented everything that made human military doctrine different from the rest of the galaxy. Where other species built massive fleets of identical vessels, humans preferred smaller forces that could adapt to any situation. Each ship had different strengths, but together they could handle almost any threat. The ground forces were led by Lieutenant Colonel Ben Hayes, whose 1st Marine Expeditionary Force consisted of 500 of Earth's most elite soldiers. Hayes had served in conflicts on a dozen different worlds, and his troops were equipped with powered armor that could operate in any environment. They had trained for boarding actions against alien vessels, though no human had ever attempted such a mission before. Sergeant Major Kate Sullivan oversaw the special operations teams that would be responsible for the most dangerous assignments. Her soldiers were experts in infiltration, sabotage, and close combat, selected from the best units that Earth's various nations could provide. Sullivan herself had grown up in the frozen wastes of northern Canada, where survival meant being harder than the environment that tried to kill you every day. Major Chris Parker commanded the fighter squadrons that would launch from the 3 capital ships. His pilots had trained in the asteroid fields around Mars, learning to navigate through debris fields while engaging multiple targets at once. They flew small, heavily armed craft that could slip through enemy defenses and strike at weak points. In larger vessels. Dr. Helen Martinez joined the expedition as the fleet's science officer, responsible for analyzing alien technology and biology. She had spent years studying the few alien artifacts that Earth had obtained through trade, and her expertise would be crucial for understanding their enemies and allies. The departure from Earth was watched by billions of people around the world. Humanity's first major military intervention in galactic affairs would either establish them as a power to be respected or reveal them as primitives who had overestimated their own abilities. Morrison felt the weight of that responsibility as he gave the order to engage the faster-than-light drives. The journey to the Kepler 442 system would take 3 days at maximum speed, during which time the human fleet would be cut off from all communication with Earth. Morrison used those days to study everything that humanity knew about the Vorthons and Zephyrians, preparing his forces for a conflict unlike anything they had ever faced. The Vorthons were described as a warrior species that had conquered dozens of worlds through superior firepower and ruthless tactics. Their ships were heavily armored and equipped with plasma weapons that could melt through most known materials. They had never been defeated in open battle, and their reputation alone was enough to make most species surrender without fighting. The Zephyrians were the complete opposite, a peaceful people who had advanced through science and cooperation rather than warfare. Their technology was elegant and sophisticated, but it had never been designed for military purposes. They reminded Morrison of some of Earth's early space colonies, idealistic communities that had flourished until reality forced them to become harder. Captain Rodriguez spent her time drilling her crew on combat procedures, making sure that every person aboard the Defiance knew their role in the coming battle. She had studied the tactical reports from the initial Zephyrian resistance and noted that their weapons had been almost useless against Vorthon armor. Human weapons worked differently, using kinetic energy rather than directed energy, and she hoped that would give them an advantage. Captain Walsh focused on coordination between the 3 ships, developing battle plans that would allow them to support each other while maximizing their individual strengths. The Ranger carried the most powerful missiles in the human arsenal, weapons that could crack open asteroids or level cities. He intended to use them to eliminate the largest Vorthon vessels before they could bring their full firepower to bear. On the human fleet, Commander Johnson ran combat simulations with her crew, practicing the high-speed attack runs that would be their primary contribution to the battle. The Storm was too small to engage capital ships directly, but it could destroy escorts and support vessels while avoiding return fire. Her ship would also serve as a communications relay, coordinating the movements of the entire human fleet. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes used the journey to brief his Marines on what they might face when boarding alien vessels. The powered armor they wore had been designed for the harsh conditions of Earth's battlefields, but it would need to be adapted for the unknown environments they might encounter. His troops practiced fighting in zero gravity and low atmosphere, preparing for battles in damaged ships or hostile environments. Dr. Martinez analyzed every piece of information available about Vorthon and Zephyrian biology, looking for weaknesses that could be exploited in combat. She discovered that the Vorthons were descended from cold-blooded reptiles and might be vulnerable to temperature changes, while the Zephyrians had evolved from creatures that lived in harmony with crystalline formations and were extremely sensitive to certain types of vibration. As the human fleet approached the edge of the Kepler 442 system, long-range sensors began picking up the massive energy signatures of the Vorthon invasion force. Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the tactical display as it revealed the true scope of what they were facing. 200 enemy ships were arranged in a tight formation around the planet, systematically bombarding the surface defenses. The surviving Zephyrian vessels were huddled close to the planet, using its gravity well and defensive satellites for protection. Morrison could see that they were taking heavy damage and would not last much longer without help. He opened a communication channel to the alien ships, and introduced himself to Commander Veltar. The Zephyrian officer appeared on the main screen, his translucent features showing both hope and despair. "Admiral Morrison, we are grateful for your response to our call for help, but I must warn you that the Vorthan fleet is far larger than anything we have ever faced. Our own forces have been almost completely destroyed." Morrison studied the tactical data and nodded grimly. The enemy had overwhelming numerical superiority, and their ships appeared to be heavily armed and armored. By any reasonable standard, the human fleet should retreat immediately and report back to Earth that the situation was hopeless. Instead, Morrison smiled and gave his response. "Commander Veltar, we appreciate the warning, but humanity did not come this far to turn back at the first sign of trouble. We will engage the Vorthan fleet and break their siege of your world." Veltar stared at the human admiral in amazement. These strange creatures from their violent world were actually planning to attack a force that outnumbered them more than 60 to 1. It was either madness or courage beyond anything he had ever witnessed. Morrison closed the channel and turned to his fleet commanders. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison. We are going to show these Vorthans what happens when they threaten innocent people. Prepare for combat." War Chief Krex Volume stood on the bridge of his flagship Bloodfang, watching the final bombardment of the Zephyrian orbital defenses with satisfaction. His massive form towered over the instrument panels, scarred hide gleaming under the red battle lights that bathed the command center. After 2 days of systematic destruction, the crystal-boned aliens had been reduced to cowering in their underground shelters, like frightened prey animals. The tactical display showed his fleet in perfect formation around the planet, 200 ships arranged in concentric circles that could deliver devastating firepower to any point on the surface. His warriors had performed exactly as expected, crushing the pathetic Zephyrian resistance with minimal losses to their own forces. Soon he would order the ground assault to begin, and another world would be added to the growing Vorthan Empire: navigation. Officer Thakran approached with the latest sensor reports, his clawed feet clicking against the metal deck plates. "War Chief, long-range sensors detect 3 unknown vessels approaching from the outer system. They appear to be of alien design, but they are broadcasting no identification signals." Krex Volume turned his attention to the sensor data, examining the energy signatures of the approaching ships. The vessels were much smaller than his own capital ships, and their construction appeared primitive compared to Vorthan military technology. Their hulls were made of simple metal alloys, rather than the advanced composites used by more sophisticated species, and their weapon arrays seemed almost laughably inadequate. Probably some foolish species responding to the Zephyrian distress. "Call," Krexvol growled with amusement. "Send a squadron to intercept them and destroy them quickly. I do not want any delays in our conquest schedule." The 3 human ships moved steadily through the outer system, their crews making final preparations for battle. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance, studying the tactical display that showed the massive Vorthan fleet spread out before them. The enemy formation was impressive in its size and organization, but Morrison had fought in enough battles to recognize the weakness in their positioning. Captain Rodriguez moved among our crew stations, checking that every system was ready for combat. The Defiance carried weapons that no alien species had ever encountered before, and she was eager to see how they would perform against Vorthan armor. Her gunners had loaded the railgun batteries with tungsten slugs designed to punch through the heaviest defenses, while the missile tubes were filled with nuclear warheads that could vaporize entire city blocks. "All stations report ready for combat, Admiral," Rodriguez announced. "The crew is at battle stations and all weapons are charged." Morrison nodded and opened communication channels to the other ships in his small fleet. Captain Walsh on the USS Ranger confirmed that his heavy missiles were armed and ready, while Commander Johnson on the USS Storm reported that her ship's engines were running at maximum efficiency. The three vessels represented everything that humanity had learned about warfare over thousands of years of conflict, compressed into the most deadly fighting machines their species had ever built. The Vorthan Intercept Squadron consisted of 6 heavy cruisers, each one larger than any of the human ships, and armed with plasma cannons that could melt through asteroid-sized chunks of rock. Squadron Commander Velkoff led the formation, confident that these primitive aliens would flee as soon as they saw the superior firepower arrayed against them. Instead, the human ships accelerated directly toward the Vorthan formation, their course unchanged by the obvious threat they faced. Velkoff opened a communication channel to the lead vessel, intending to give the aliens one chance to surrender before destroying them. The image that appeared on his screen confused him completely. Instead of the towering reptilian warriors he was accustomed to facing, he saw a small bipedal creature with soft pink skin and tiny eyes. The being appeared to be female by human standards, though Velkoff had no way of understanding such distinctions. She stood calmly on what appeared to be a primitive command bridge, showing no fear despite being vastly outnumbered. "This is Captain Lisa Rodriguez of the United Earth Defense Force," the creature said in a clear, steady voice. "You are engaged in unprovoked aggression against a peaceful species. Withdraw from this system immediately or face the consequences." Velkoff stared at the transmission for several seconds before erupting into laughter that echoed throughout his bridge. The idea that this tiny, fragile creature could threaten the might of the Vorthan Empire struck him as the most absurd thing he had ever heard. His warriors joined in the laughter, finding humor in the desperate bluff of an obviously inferior species. "Small creature," Velkoff replied when his amusement subsided, "you have made a grave error in judgment. Prepare to join your crystal-boned friends in death." He cut the communication channel and ordered his ships to open fire with all weapons. 6 plasma cannons discharged simultaneously, sending streams of superheated energy toward the human vessels. The beams struck the strange ships and were absorbed by some kind of defensive barrier that flared briefly, before returning to invisibility. Velkoff's laughter died as he realized that the primitive aliens possessed shield technology that could absorb Vorthan firepower. Before he could process this information fully, the human ships returned fire with weapons he had never seen before. The USS Defiance launched a salvo from its main railgun battery, sending tungsten slugs accelerating to a significant fraction of light speed. The kinetic projectiles struck the lead Vorthan cruiser with the force of nuclear explosions, punching through the ship's armor, plating like bullets through paper. Secondary explosions rippled along the vessel's hull as internal systems overloaded and power conduits ruptured. Captain Walsh fired a spread of heavy missiles from the USS Ranger, each warhead guided by advanced targeting systems that could track multiple targets simultaneously. The nuclear weapons detonated against Vorthan shields in brilliant flashes of white light, overwhelming the defensive systems and allowing the explosive force to reach the ship's hulls. Commander Johnson brought the USS Storm racing through the enemy formation at impossible speed, her ship's point defense systems intercepting incoming fire while her crew launched precision strikes against weapon emplacements and sensor arrays. The destroyer moved like a living thing, dodging plasma beams and returned fire while delivering devastating attacks against vulnerable systems. Within minutes, 3 of the 6 Vorthan ships had been destroyed or crippled, their crews dead or dying in the vacuum of space. The surviving vessels found themselves facing an enemy that fought with a ferocity and technological sophistication they had never encountered before. Squadron Commander Velkoff watched his formation disintegrate around him and felt something he had not experienced since his first battle as a young warrior: genuine fear. These humans fought with weapons that could match Vorthan firepower, but more importantly, they used tactics that no civilized species would employ. They targeted life support systems, weapon arrays, and command centers with surgical precision, showing an understanding of ship design that spoke of extensive combat experience. The communication array on his bridge crackled to life with an emergency. Transmission from War Chief Krex Volume. Squadron Commander, report your status immediately. Our sensors show massive energy discharges in your area. War Chief, Velkoth replied, his voice tight with shock. The aliens have weapons that can penetrate our armor. We have lost 3 ships, and the survivors are taking heavy damage. These creatures are not the primitives we expected. Back on the Bloodfang, Krex Volume stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His elite squadron was being systematically destroyed by 3 small ships crewed by aliens that his intelligence reports had classified as barely space-capable. The energy signatures coming from the human weapons were unlike anything in the Vorthan database, and their tactical coordination suggested military experience far beyond what should have been possible for such a young species. He opened a fleet-wide communication channel and addressed his entire force. All vessels, this is War Chief Krex Volume. The enemy has proven more capable than anticipated. Form defensive formations around the flagship and prepare for full combat engagement. The massive Vorthan fleet began to reorganize itself, moving from bombardment positions to battle formations designed for ship-to-ship combat. Hundreds of plasma cannons swiveled toward the approaching human ships, while fighter squadrons launched from carrier vessels to provide additional firepower. Admiral Morrison watched the enemy response with professional interest. The Vorthans were reacting exactly as his tactical analysis had predicted, moving from a position of overwhelming superiority to one of defensive uncertainty. He opened a communication channel to Commander Veltar on the surviving Zephyrian ships. Commander, this is Admiral Morrison. We are engaging the Vorthan fleet now. Keep your people in the shelters until we signal that the area is secure. Veltar stared at the human admiral in amazement. These strange creatures from their death world were actually attacking a force that outnumbered them more than 60 to 1, and they seemed confident of victory. Admiral, surely you cannot expect to defeat such a large enemy force with only 3 ships. The space around Kepler 442b erupted into chaos as the full Vorthan fleet engaged the 3 human ships in the largest battle the system had ever witnessed. War Chief Krex Volume stood on his bridge, watching hundreds of plasma beams streak across the darkness, their superheated energy creating a deadly web of destruction that should have vaporized any enemy foolish enough to challenge his armada. Instead, the human vessels moved through the barrage like predators hunting prey, their shields absorbing hits that would have destroyed lesser ships while returning fire with weapons that carved through Vorthan armor with terrifying efficiency. The USS Defiance led the formation, its massive railguns sending tungsten slugs through space at velocities that made them almost impossible to intercept. Captain Rodriguez felt the deck plates vibrate beneath her feet as her ship's main batteries fired in sequence, each shot carefully aimed at critical systems on enemy vessels. Her crew worked with the precision that came from years of training in Earth's military academies, where failure meant death and success meant survival for another day. Target the command ship's weapon arrays, Rodriguez ordered her gunnery officer. I want those plasma cannons offline before they can coordinate another volley. The tungsten projectiles struck the Vorthan flagship's forward batteries with the force of meteors, crushing the delicate focusing arrays and severing power conduits. In showers of sparks and venting atmosphere, Krex Volume felt his ship shudder under the impact and watched helplessly as his most powerful weapons went dark one by one. Commander Johnson brought the USS Storm racing through the enemy formation at maximum speed, her destroyer weaving between capital ships like a fighter craft, while her crew targeted escort vessels and support ships. The Vorthons had never faced an enemy that moved with such aggressive confidence, diving into the heart of their formation rather than trying to maintain safe distance. "Enemy destroyer moving through Sector 7, reported Navigation Officer Thakrin. "It is targeting our supply ships and ammunition carriers." Johnson's tactical officer identified a cluster of Vorthon logistics vessels, trying to retreat behind the protection of heavier warships. These ships carried the fuel and ammunition that kept the invasion fleet operational, and their destruction would cripple the enemy's ability to sustain prolonged combat. "Launch all missiles at the supply convoy," Johnson commanded. "Full spread. Maximum yield." 20 nuclear warheads streaked toward the fleeing Vorthon ships, their guidance systems locked onto the largest targets. The explosions lit up space like miniature suns, vaporizing 3 ammunition ships and sending debris cascading through the enemy formation. Secondary explosions followed as stored plasma charges detonated, creating a chain reaction that destroyed 2 more vessels. Captain Walsh positioned the USS Ranger at the edge of the battle zone, using his ship's superior sensors to coordinate attacks between all 3 human vessels. The Ranger carried the heaviest missiles in the fleet, weapons designed to crack open fortified positions or destroy heavily armored targets. "Admiral, I have targeting solutions on their 3 largest dreadnoughts," Walsh reported. "Permission to engage with heavy ordnance." Morrison studied the tactical display and nodded. "Fire when ready, Captain. Let us show them what human engineering can accomplish." The Ranger's missile tubes opened and disgorged 12 massive warheads, each one carrying enough explosive power to level a mountain range. The weapons accelerated toward their targets, while defensive systems tried desperately to intercept them. But human missile technology incorporated decades of experience fighting against advanced point defense networks. The first warhead struck a Vorthon dreadnought amidships, its nuclear payload detonating deep within the ship's hull and sending shockwaves through every deck and compartment. The massive vessel broke apart in a series of secondary explosions as its power core overloaded and its ammunition stores ignited simultaneously. Krex Volume watched one of his most powerful ships die in flames and felt something he had never experienced. In 30 years of conquest, doubt about the outcome of a battle. These humans fought with a combination of advanced technology and tactical sophistication that suggested military experience far beyond what their primitive appearance would indicate. But the real shock came when Lieutenant Colonel Hayes launched the first boarding action in galactic history. The assault pods launched from the USS Defiance were small, heavily armored craft designed to carry Marine squads directly into enemy ships. Each pod was equipped with cutting charges that could breach even the thickest hull plating, allowing the Marines inside to establish footholds within hostile vessels. Hayes led the first wave personally, his powered armor gleaming with the dull metal finish that human military engineers preferred over the bright colors favored by other species. Behind him came 20 of his best Marines, each one equipped with kinetic weapons and armor systems that had been tested in the harshest environments Earth could provide. The pod struck a Vorthon heavy cruiser simultaneously, their cutting charges burning through the hull plating in showers of molten metal. Atmospheric alarms screamed throughout the alien ship as pressure seals activated and emergency bulkheads slammed shut, trying to contain the breach. The Vorthon crew had never faced boarders before, since most galactic species considered such tactics to be barbaric and uncivilized. They scrambled to defensive positions while their officers tried to understand how enemy soldiers could have gotten inside their ship. Hayes and his Marines emerged from their pods into a corridor filled with confused and frightened aliens. The Vorthons were larger and stronger than humans, with natural armor plating and claws that could tear through most materials. but they had never faced opponents who moved with the coordinated precision of Earth's elite soldiers. The first Vorthan warrior to challenge the intruders was a massive specimen named Gregtor, whose scarred hide bore the marks of dozens of previous battles. He charged down the corridor with a plasma rifle in his claws, confident that his superior size and strength would overwhelm the small alien invaders. Hayes stepped forward to meet the charge, his powered armor allowing him to move with speed. That seemed impossible for such a heavily equipped soldier. He ducked under Gregtor's clumsy swing and delivered a precise strike to the alien's knee joint, sending the Vorthan crashing to the deck with a roar of pain and surprise. Before Gregtor could recover, Hayes placed his rifle against the alien's head and fired a single shot that ended the fight instantly. The other Marines moved past their commander, advancing through the ship with the methodical efficiency that came from years of training in close-quarters combat. Sergeant Major Sullivan led her special operations team through the ship's ventilation system, using routes that the Vorthans had never expected anyone to access. Her soldiers were experts in infiltration and sabotage, trained to operate behind enemy lines where discovery meant certain death. They reached the ship's engineering section and began placing explosive charges on critical systems, targeting power, conduits and computer networks that controlled life support and navigation. Within minutes, they had turned the Vorthan vessel into a floating tomb, its crew trapped in compartments that were rapidly losing atmosphere and power. The boarding action succeeded beyond all expectations, with human Marines capturing or destroying 3 enemy ships while suffering minimal casualties. The Vorthans discovered that their advantages in size and strength meant nothing against opponents who had evolved on a world where survival required constant adaptation and innovation. Major Parker's fighter squadrons launched from the 3 capital ships, their small craft racing through the debris field created by the ongoing battle. Human pilots had trained in the asteroid belts around Mars, learning to navigate through complex environments while engaging multiple targets simultaneously. The Vorthan fighters were larger and more heavily armed, but they flew in rigid formations. That made them predictable targets for pilots who had learned to think 3-dimensionally. Parker led his squadron through a series of diving attacks that broke up enemy fighter screens and allowed the capital ships to engage larger targets without interference. Dr. Martinez monitored the battle from the USS Defiance's science station, analyzing the performance of human weapons against alien defenses while studying the wreckage of destroyed enemy ships. Her observations would be crucial for understanding Vorthan technology and developing countermeasures against their remaining capabilities. Admiral, I am detecting significant structural damage to their flagship, Martinez reported. The repeated impacts from our railgun batteries have compromised their primary hull supports. One more concentrated attack should be sufficient to disable the vessel completely. Morrison nodded and opened communication channels to his fleet commanders. All ships, focus fire on the enemy flagship. It is time to end this battle decisively. The 3 human ships coordinated their attacks with the precision of a surgical strike, their combined firepower overwhelming the Bloodfang's defensive systems and striking at the heart of Vorthan resistance. Krex Volume felt his command ship dying around him and realized that his mighty empire had encountered something it had never faced before. The rings of Kepler 442b glittered with ice crystals and metallic debris as the surviving Vorthan fleet made its desperate final stand among the planetary formations. War Chief Krex Volume stood on the damaged bridge of his flagship Bloodfang, watching. His once mighty armada, reduced to fewer than 60 ships by the relentless assault of 3 human vessels that refused to die, emergency lighting cast red shadows across his scarred features as damage reports flooded in from across his fleet. Half of his capital ships had been destroyed or crippled. His fighter squadrons had been decimated by human pilots who flew like demons possessed, and his boarding parties had been slaughtered by alien marines who fought with a savagery that shocked even veteran Vorthan warriors. "War Chief," reported his tactical officer with barely controlled panic, "the human ships are closing on our position. Our remaining vessels are taking heavy damage, and several captains are requesting permission to withdraw from the system." Krexval's massive fist crashed down on the command console, cracking the crystalline display screen. In 30 years of conquest, no enemy had ever forced him to consider retreat, and the idea of fleeing from these small pink creatures filled him with rage that burned hotter than plasma fire. "Signal all ships," he growled through clenched fangs. "Deploy the planet killer missiles. If we cannot have this world, then no one will." The order sent shockwaves through his surviving fleet commanders. Planet killer weapons were the ultimate expression of Vorthan military power, massive warheads designed to crack worlds open from the core and render them uninhabitable for millennia. They had only been used twice in the Empire's history, both times against species that had dared to resist Vorthan rule to the bitter end. Admiral Morrison watched the tactical display as energy signatures unlike anything in human databases began appearing throughout the enemy formation. Dr. Martinez worked frantically at her science station, analyzing the sensor data and trying to understand what new threat the Vorthans were preparing to unleash. "Admiral, I am detecting massive energy buildups in the remaining enemy vessels," Martinez reported with growing alarm. "The power signatures suggest weapons of incredible destructive potential, far beyond anything we have encountered so far." Morrison studied the readings and felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. The Vorthans were preparing to destroy the planet rather than lose it to human intervention, which meant that millions of innocent Zephyrian civilians would die unless he could stop them within the next few minutes. "All ships, maximum acceleration toward the enemy formation," Morrison commanded. "We need to disable those weapons before they can fire." Captain Rodriguez pushed the USS Defiance to its operational limits, a massive dreadnought racing through the ring system while her crew prepared for what would likely be their final engagement. The gravitational forces generated by the planet and its rings created navigation hazards that would have challenged even experienced pilots. But Rodriguez had grown up flying through the asteroid fields of the Sol system where a single mistake meant death. "Gunnery, target all remaining firepower on the enemy flagship," Rodriguez ordered. "That is where their command and control systems will be concentrated." The Defiance's railgun batteries fired in continuous sequence, sending streams of tungsten projectiles through the ice and debris that filled the space between the opposing fleets. Each shot was carefully calculated to account for gravitational drift and orbital mechanics, striking the Bloodfang with precision that would have been impossible for conventional energy weapons. Commander Johnson brought the USS Storm racing through the enemy formation one final time, her destroyer's engines screaming at maximum output as she wove between capital ships that dwarfed her vessel. Her crew targeted the planet killer missiles directly, using point defense systems and short-range torpedoes to destroy the massive warheads before they could be launched. "Johnson to Admiral Morrison," she transmitted over the tactical network. "I count 12 planet killers in the enemy formation. My ship can handle maybe half of them before we take too much damage to continue." Captain Walsh positioned the USS Ranger at optimal firing range and began launching his remaining heavy missiles at the largest Vorthan vessels. Each warhead was programmed with targeting data that Martinez had compiled during the battle, aimed at specific weak points that human analysis had identified in enemy ship design. But even as the human fleet pressed its attack with desperate intensity, Krexval's surviving ships began launching their world-ending weapons toward the planet below. The massive missiles accelerated through space with the inexorable momentum of falling mountains, their nuclear cores primed to burrow deep into the planetary crust before detonating with enough force to shatter continents. Morrison realized that conventional tactics would not be sufficient to stop weapons of such massive destructive power. The planet-killer missiles were too large and too well-armored to be destroyed by normal firepower, and there were too many of them for his small fleet to intercept every threat. That was when he made a decision that would define humanity's reputation in the galaxy for generations to come. All ships, new targeting priority, Morrison announced over the fleet communication network. Target the enemy vessel's life support systems. We are going to disable their crews without destroying their ships. The order confused the Vorthan fleet commanders, who could not understand why the humans would waste firepower on non-critical systems when planet-killer weapons were already in flight. But Dr. Martinez had discovered something crucial during her analysis of captured Vorthan technology. The reptilian warriors were extremely vulnerable to atmospheric changes, particularly the oxygen-nitrogen mixture that humans breathed naturally. Weapons began targeting ventilation systems, atmospheric processors, and environmental controls throughout the enemy fleet. Instead of trying to destroy Vorthan ships, they flooded them with Earth-normal atmosphere that was toxic to reptilian physiology. Within minutes, entire crews were collapsing as their respiratory systems failed to process the alien air mixture. The planet-killer missiles continued their deadly trajectory toward Kepler 442b, but without functional crews to guide them, their targeting systems began to drift off course. Several warheads missed the planet entirely, sailing harmlessly into deep space, while others struck the rings and exploded in brilliant flashes that illuminated the entire system. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes led the final boarding assault against the Bloodfang itself, his Marines fighting through corridors filled with weakened and confused Vorthan warriors. The powered armor that protected human soldiers also provided them with independent life support, allowing them to operate in environments that would kill unprotected personnel. Hayes reached the flagship's bridge to find War Chief Krex Volume waiting for him, the massive alien warrior struggling to breathe in the oxygen-rich atmosphere that human weapons had flooded through his ship. Despite his obvious distress, the Vorthan commander still stood over 8 feet tall and possessed claws that could tear through most materials. "So you are the leader of these Deathworld creatures," Krex Volume wheezed through his failing respiratory system. "You fight without honor, using poison gas and coward's tactics against superior warriors." Hayes removed his helmet and breathed the ship's atmosphere normally, demonstrating that what was toxic to the Vorthan was merely the air of his homeworld. "War Chief, we fight to win. Honor is a luxury that dead soldiers cannot afford." The two warriors faced each other in the center of the alien bridge, surrounded by unconscious Vorthan crew members and the wreckage of a mighty war fleet. Krex Volume raised his plasma rifle with shaking claws, but Hayes was faster, his human reflexes allowing him to close the distance before the alien could fire. The brief struggle that followed ended with Krex Vol's surrender. The once mighty war chief reduced to gasping for breath on the deck of his own flagship. Hayes stood over his defeated opponent and spoke the words that would echo through galactic history. "War Chief Krex Volume of the Vorthan Empire, I accept your surrender on behalf of the United Earth Defense Force. Your invasion of this system is at an end." The news of the Vorthan defeat spread across subspace communication networks faster than the human fleet had traveled to reach the battle. Commander Veltar emerged from the underground shelters of Colony Prime to find his world intact and his people safe, saved by warriors from a species he had dismissed as primitive only days before. Admiral Morrison stood on the observation deck of the USS Defiance, looking out at the debris field that had once been the most powerful invasion fleet in Vorthan history. His 3 ships hung in space among the wreckage, battered but victorious, their crews already beginning repairs for the long journey home. The final count showed that humanity had destroyed or captured over 140 enemy vessels, while losing none of their own ships, though all three had taken significant damage during the prolonged engagement. More importantly, they had demonstrated to the galaxy that Earth's Deathworlders were not to be underestimated. Dr. Martinez completed her analysis of captured Vorthan technology and began preparing reports that would revolutionize human understanding of galactic military capabilities.